Well, greetings, everybody, and welcome along to this special episode of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Now, today we're talking with Greg Cross. Now, Greg has a pretty esteemed history within the technology and the business world in New Zealand, recently won the award at the NZ Hi-Tech Awards of the New Zealand Hi-Tech Flying Kiwi in 2019, but really has a wealth of experience and knowledge, and currently is leading Soul Machines. Welcome along to the podcast, Greg. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time out. I know that during this period, it's for many of us, it's actually busier than it normally is, and I imagine you're probably in that category where COVID-19 has piled an extra workload on top of you, compared to some who are maybe not able to work. I would imagine at Soul Machines you're probably pretty flat tack.
Yeah, look, we're very, as a company, we're very lucky in many respects. We're a digital company, so I have 150 people all over the world working from home. We're working in a part of the tech sector where we can actually help a lot during this time. So, and perhaps we'll get into talking about some of the projects we've undertaken to actually, try and make a difference and figure out how our technology can make a difference in times like this and the new world, or whatever follows on from here going forward. So, it's a really interesting time. It's a very different world for me. I usually spend most of my life on an aeroplane. Flying around the world. I'm once again lucky to be living in New Zealand, but I traveled for business, and I traveled non-stop for business. So this is the longest I've actually been in New Zealand, for about 10 years.
Wow.
So yeah, so my wife and family are having to learn how to put up with me on a full-time basis at the moment.
Oh, I'm sure they're appreciating it. Well, I thought it'd be interesting because of the many things that you've done over the years to get a little bit of that background of of some of your history in the tech world. And look, I mean, you've been involved in so many things. I'm not quite sure which things you'd like to pick out. I mean, my recollection of probably first coming across you was you were the managing director or chief executive at Microsoft New Zealand when it started as an actual New Zealand entity. Before that, Microsoft products were just through I think a single distributor in New Zealand, and there was no actual in-country representation, and it moved from that pretty quickly to being a local operation that grew at pace, and the likes of Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer were flying into the country. You mentioned to me before we started, but how did you get to that point of being shoulder tapped to or pulled into to lead Microsoft locally? What was before that?
I mean, a whole bunch of stuff before that. I'm an old guy, Paul. So been around. I think I've forgotten more of the things that I've done than I remember these days. But immediately, I guess before Microsoft, and I was the second MD there. Chris Callagher was the guy that set up Microsoft in New Zealand for the first time. But so I took over when Chris moved on to run the Australian sub. But immediately prior to Microsoft, I was 2IC to Keith Davis at Bell South, so launched the Bell South GSM network, or the first digital network, second cellular network here in New Zealand. So that was kind of a monstrous startup, if you like to think of it as that. And before that,
it was.
And prior to Bell South, I'd spent a bunch of years offshore with my first entrepreneurial adventure as part of fact, international back in the, I guess, mini computer days is I guess the way you would. So that really dates me, because that takes us back to the mid '80s. So yeah, so Microsoft was, I joined Microsoft, after spending some time at Bell South, and it was a really exciting time for Microsoft as a company. Probably the highlight of my career there was Windows 95 and the launch of that. That brought Bill Gates back to New Zealand for the second time, and I think within 12 months, and we also had Barmer visit New Zealand as part of that. So these guys were took a lot of interest in every single one of their subsidiaries, and so it was a really interesting time to be able to work alongside, learn from tech luminaries like Gates and Barmer.
Yeah, amazing. And is it, I mean, anything that sort of struck you from interacting with them? Because I mean, that was a business that grew from nothing to ultimately right at the pinnacle in terms of businesses globally, and I guess how software is sold today is quite different to how it was then, and really the subscription models have really helped grow revenues even more. But it was still quite a key time in Microsoft's development, and must have been very interesting in interacting with such visionary leaders.
Yeah, I mean, I think and it was it was a time where I learned a lot as a manager and an executive. I mean, I think probably some of the things that I took away from my interactions with guys like Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. One, they were insanely competitive people. So to be successful, you have to want to and be driven to compete. So I mean, that was I guess that was the first thing. Second thing, I learned from. Are you still there, Paul?
Yep.
Sorry, second thing I learned from them was, that their culture was one where, they would intensely debate decisions. I mean, often when you're making decisions in a high-tech environment, there isn't a roadmap or a template to follow. So, you've got to be prepared to have a robust debate about the key decisions and the important decisions. So I mean, that's something I've carried forward with me into my in my career, and the final point is when you make a mistake, when you get it wrong, being prepared to put your hand up, take responsibility, and change direction really quickly. I think I mean, they were things that I found Bill Gates in particular was just was absolutely amazing at, and really key lessons that have shaped me and my career since then.
Any recollections on any wrong turns where there were?
Yeah, I mean, I think the really big one that happened in my in my era was the internet era, I mean, which was emerging in that time, and the browser wars with Netscape, and Microsoft was was largely set on building its own version of the internet. At the time, it was a proprietary world. They owned the desktop. And then when they understood, what the browser actually meant, I can remember, coming to work early one morning, and Bill had written a very long email to managers and executives in the company about how we needed to embed the browser, the internet, into everything, and it really was complete 180 degrees to the previous strategy, and literally the whole organization turned on a dime and changed direction. So that was quite amazing to see, quite amazing to be part of.
Yeah. Now, look, I want to be able to get onto talking about Soul Machines, of course, and maybe we can save another sort of podcast to hear the highlight of your journey. But I would be a little bit curious to hear sort of say between those Microsoft days and and now one or two sort of highlights, and I don't know how you do that, because there's been a lot of things that you've done in between. But as you say, you've been flying around the world and doing business globally for a long time. Right now we can't travel, but more than ever, I think New Zealand businesses need to be looking out globally and looking for those opportunities to export and to sell our intellectual property, our smarts, our creativity to the world. So I'm kind of curious if there's some learnings you've got along the way that you might be able to share from that period.
Yeah, I mean, look, while I've always lived here, I've always done business on the international stage. So, yeah, that's kind of been what's always fascinated me. Inspired, from the early days of my entrepreneurial career, working with people like Bill Foreman at Trigon Packaging. It was a high-tech engineering company in the plastic space. Bill was driven to compete and win on the international stage, and he was my first boss, and it's kind of inspired my whole career. So, look, you learn every step along the way. You make lots of mistakes. You accumulate lots of scar tissue to that help you that you can take forward from one business opportunity to the next. Immediately prior to Soul Machines, I had Power by Proxy, which was co-founded with Fatty Mashriki, out of the spin out of the University of Auckland, a business that we competed and won in some really interesting battles on the world stage. I mean,
yes, yeah, it was fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it was a fascinating place. I mean, it was a world that was heavily based on a major standards battle, and our engineers at Power by Proxy, Fatty, were really able to really shape that the outcome of a global fight for the standard of wireless power, just because they were the best engineers and they had the best understanding of how to build solutions in that space. So, that was an amazing time. I mean, capital raising becomes a really important part of a venture capital journey or an entrepreneurial journey, particularly if you're wanting to compete on the world stage. You've got to put yourself in a position to raise capital. Not just raise venture capital, but to look to raise venture capital from the best investors in your space, in your market, in the world. At Soul Machines, we're extraordinarily fortunate to have some of the best, some of the leading AI investors in the world as investors in Soul Machines, and that makes a big difference to your credibility and the way people look at you and the way people regard you,
yes.
On the world stage. Horizons Ventures. And Selena Chow, who heads that venture fund based out of Hong Kong. Amazing team of people who have, invested in and managed to pick, some amazing winners in the AI space. They were early investors in DeepMind. They were early investors in the Siri team that got acquired by Apple, and when they left Apple, they invested in Viv. Big investors in Zoom as well. So, having people like Selena, Chris Liu, and some of the other members of that venture team, be here to help us and guide us, as particularly through uncertain times like this, invaluable. And then another thing that we're very fortunate about, right now, right here is, we just closed a major funding round in December of last year. So it means we do go into this crisis, into these uncertain times with a lot of capital in the bank, which does mean we can continue to execute against our plan. We don't have to be worried about how we're going to continue. So we brought on some more great investors, Temasek, global investor out of Singapore, Lakestar, one of the biggest VC funds in Europe, and Salesforce Ventures as part of that investment group, and each of those are making a huge difference to the way in which we are able to operate now. Raising venture capital is all about how you use that money to get to your next round, or how you use that money to get to profitability. So as a company, we're very fortunate. Unlike a lot of startups who now have to just can't find or can't raise their next round of capital. By good luck and good timing, we are in a very, very fortunate position today. But and there is there is a lot of hard work and good luck and good timing that goes into raising any funding round. So once again, it does enable us to continue on with what the work that we're doing and how we're doing. We've actually been continuing to grow as a company, not as fast as we'd originally planned to, but we're continuing to grow as a company, both from an employee and a revenue point of view. Managing a growing team of 150 odd people all around the world, means I now spend a lot more of my day just communicating and talking to people and making sure they understand changes in directions and the new world in which we're living and what that actually means for us as an organization.
Now, you talked about the importance of funding, but for more than actually just the financial aspects. It seems to be very important, particularly in times like this, to be able to draw in on the expertise of these venture capital firms and their leadership. How much do you think that, in terms of them deciding to invest in for instance, Soul Machines, how much of that comes down to the people, and how much comes down to the ideas and the intellectual property? Because it's always a balance, isn't it? And I'm sure you probably get it more than me, but I get people sort of telling me about their ideas and telling me how amazing these things are that they've got. But ultimately, without the right mix of people behind those ideas, then it's unlikely that a startup's going to be successful.
Yeah, ultimately, it always does come down to the team, and the people you bring on board, the leadership team that you build to execute against your idea, your product, your strategy. So it very, very much is comes down in most respects to the quality of your team. We're as a company, we've got a very, very deep research focus. My amazing co-founder and the inventor of our technology, Dr. Mark Sager, really has developed through what is a very, very unique career. This amazing body of intellectual property that is at the cornerstone of what we call the emerging field of artificial general intelligence. What comes after AI? Artificial general intelligence, adding more human intelligence, and Mark's research into using neuroscience, psychology, stuff we refer to as biologically inspired AI. We are now recognized as the leading research company, deep research company in this field. So that's a very, very important part of what we do and how investors look at the value of our company. But I guess by the same token, at the end of the day, the ultimate test comes down to revenue growth and market share, and what your trajectory looks like and how how that's progressing. I think, if we go back, and I've seen through a few of these economic events in my career. I vaguely remember the '87 crash. The dot-com bubble bursting in 2001. The GFC, and now this, which is which we now know is going to change the world as we know it, and in just about every respect going forward. So. One of the things I think we think about, and anybody who is venture funded or aspiring to be venture funded, coming out of this, history would say that the most important thing going forward will be revenue growth rates. If you as investors get their checkbooks out again, next year or the year after, or whenever it might be, it is going to be look at companies that are really demonstrating, the best revenue growth rates in their category. So that's kind of how, that's what's driving a lot about the way I'm thinking at the moment, and the way which I'm managing the strategy for Soul Machines. We're heading into this, we're heading into this digital era, now. I mean, and look, we've all been talking about digital transformation for a long time now, and some of us, and many organisations, many industries have been doing too much talking and not enough doing in the space. And it is a massive shift to digital. In every sense. There are so many uncertainties. There are so many unknowns. We can't bank on the fact that there will be a vaccine. We can't bank on the fact that there won't be a second wave, or that in 12 months' time, 24 months' time, there might not be another mutation, and more virulent mutation of this disease. I mean, I don't know. And from the best I can make out, even the best experts don't know at this point in time. So they are the sort of things, that's the sort of environment where we have to think about the way in which we plan out all of our businesses, all of our industries going forward. I mean, assuming that we're that we can just go back to being dependent on tourism anytime soon. I just don't see that happening. Now, look, I'm not saying I don't hope that it does, Paul. I mean, but I think we're in a world now where if we're not planning our business, we're not planning the way we're going to compete within our industry, or reinvent our industry, or even reinvent our company to be, to deliver our products, our services, our brands, our customer experiences in a digital way. I think we're missing the point in what will be will end up being pretty disastrous for those that don't get it. And that's I think that's the really the big opportunity for New Zealand and the New Zealand economy going forward. We have great UFB, we have great broadband infrastructure in this country, better than many countries. Yet, by most measures, we've been slow to invest in the digital economy. We've been slow to invest in online e-commerce and retail-based e-commerce. So, these I think are the opportunities that we really need to wrap our heads around. And as you say, I mean, we have as a country, as an inherent part of our culture, this innate creativity and this ability to make things happen, but it really comes down to making that conscious choice around whether we're going to be looking back and saying we want the world to go back to that way, or whether we're looking forward and saying how do we need to change, what do we need to do differently now. So that's very much the way in which I mean, obviously we're a completely digital business. We barely missed a day of work. We're completely redesigning the way we work now. I mean, we've discovered how much more efficient we can be from working from home, so as we move towards level 2 and the potential to maybe reopen our office, we're not going to reopen it the way it was being used before. We're looking at how we might reconfigure it, how we might give people a lot more flexibility around working from home, and and when and where people work and how people work. So yeah, it's it's uncertain, but it's exciting to be looking at these types of challenges.
Yeah, I mean it's pleasing to see your approach there, and I do wonder how as a country with so many sort of smaller to medium businesses, and some of them, as you say, we're not as astute digitally and as advanced digitally as we really should be, especially considering that underlying infrastructure. It is going to be an interesting journey forward, and looking back in 3, 4, 5 years to see who are those that really succeeded, that really took advantage of this opportunity where we're sort of forced to step back and to rethink things because of the level of disruption that's going on right now. And I think there are plenty who are looking at things and just waiting for it to get back to level 2, level 1, and we'll just go back to our offices and operate as we always did, and maybe miss that opportunity. I certainly hope that's not the case. Now you talked about as a startup, and you're about 4 years or so into, how many years into the journey
now? 3.5. Yep.
Yep.
Getting close to 4, actually. Getting really close to 4. Yeah. I mean, the year seems to have disappeared very quickly already. So but we are getting close to 4 years old.
So you're 4 years, and a very much a research based business, and yet you can't just sort of stop and focus on your research for the first 5 or 10 years. You've actually got to be out selling. What sort of a challenge is that for you to monetize? Because I guess there's a well, we've seen it with other business. I mean, Xero is an example where they put a huge amount of time into being focused on growth and development while they're still developing their technology underlying. Now, a very sort of different business, and for them it was that their cash was going into growing market share in different parts of the world, such as the US, that was really expensive. In your case, I guess you're on this research and development journey, but how do you balance that sort of investment into going out and selling, and the investment into the research, which has to underpin anything that you ever have to sell?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's 2 parts to it. So to do the sort of research we do requires a lot of money. So we've raised, as a company in 4 years, we raised $65 million in venture capital. So there's just no way we could fund the type of research that we're doing, and the amount of research that we're doing on more what I'd call more typical New Zealand sized VC rounds, which at Series B it's more like, companies might have raised $5 million, $5 to $10 million. So part of it is predicated. Our business model is predicated on doing that research and raising the amount of capital that's required to do that research. But at the same time, we do have this twin-headed or dual-headed focus. So Mark is really focused on the research and driving the amazing technology that he's created, him and our team have created, to the next level. And my job on the business side is to really build a world-class business team. Our business head office is based in San Francisco. We've attracted leading product, sales, customer success, marketing executives from top technology companies in the US to come on board and set up our, at the commercialization side of our organization, and really, prosecute, the markets and win the sorts of brands that we're doing business with. We're, as well as being a world-class research company, we've demonstrated, our ability to attract major brands like like Procter and Gamble, like Mercedes-Benz, Autodesk, just to name a few. We've really been very successful at attracting some of these big brands to come and work with us and be part of a journey, and that provides a very, very strong foundation for us to continue to build our business and accelerate our growth. So we do offer, we currently, with San Francisco as our business head office, we have offices in LA, Chicago, New York, London, Tokyo, Melbourne. So at the moment, our plans this year were to open, with our new investment, to open offices in Singapore and in Europe. But they're on hold for now. So we're very, very much focused on the markets that we're prosecuting at the moment.
Yep. Now, maybe you can walk us through just a little bit more of the history in terms of, I guess it goes back to Mark's initial research and how his work there. And I remember seeing him, featured at a TEDx, here in Auckland. Probably that was maybe the early days, but possibly before the business started as such, or in the early days, and then that journey. I mean, how did it go from those initial ideas into a business that's so well funded and has such a big team, working on it? So Mark, Mark's well known for his success in Hollywood, winning Oscars for the animation technology he created for movies like Avatar and King Kong. So that's sort of a platform for which Mark grew off. I mean, he'd also had a career doing a lot of academic research in the United States prior to joining the movie industry. So after winning a couple of Oscars, Mark set up a research lab at the University of Auckland to start exploring this concept of autonomous animation. If you look at the movie industry and you look at movies like Avatar and the amazing CGI movies, all of that animation is created using actors and motion capture cameras and pre-recorded and edited content. So Mark had got curious about how you could take that next step. In a world of AI, in a world of machines, how could we autonomously animate CGI characters? And that's what he set up as original research lab at the University of Auckland to study. And the core concept he started with, really came back to, well, how are we animated? How are we as humans animated? I mean, what's animating this conversation is our brain. My brain, the words I'm choosing, the way I'm expressing myself, your brain, the questions you're asking, and the interaction that we're having for your listeners and viewers. So Mark started then pulling together a multidisciplinary research team of neuroscientists, psychologists, and that's where a lot of the core work began. That was back in 2012. So for the first from 2012 through to the middle of 2016, Mark had built up a research team. His focus was around a project called Baby X, which is an autonomous digital baby that he built and brought to life using the early versions of our digital brain. During that period, the team filed a lot of core patents. So Mark and I were, at the beginning of 2016, Mark and I were introduced by a mutual friend, Claudia Batten, another Flying Kiwi award winner, and a very close friend of mine.
she introduced Mark and I. We had the proverbial, went to the pub, had a beer, decided we quite liked each other's personalities and complementary skill sets, and that's really where the journey began. It was, I think, February of 2016. Between February and the middle of July, when the company was officially formed, we built a business plan and raised money from, bought our first round of Series A venture capital on board from the Horizons Ventures team out of Hong Kong. So that was really, and that first round of funding was $7.5 million US dollars. So that was something that was that was the first steps. From there, a lot of research organisations stay very research focused. I mean, if you look at DeepMind as as a comparable, the Demis and Mustafa at DeepMind, really only wanted to be a research-based organisation, and so that's that's one of the reasons why they decided to exit the business at a relatively early age, or exit the business for their investors and become part of Google's research team. So Mark and I both wanted to see this technology commercialized and see it become successful. So one of the things that we've been very, very focused on is making sure that we are continuously engaged with selling to building solutions for customers, because we find that is a really, really essential ingredient in terms of providing that feedback loop into our research and our development. Because I mean, ultimately what we're about here is we're creating a different type of user experience, and really, really hard to build the future, what we believe will be the future of user experience, the way in which we as people will interact with machines in the future. Really, really hard to build that without a lot of different user feedback in different industries and different use cases. So that's why the two parts of the company are so valuable to each other.
That's great. Now, I'd like to hear a little bit about what you envisage that future, to look like. I guess we got introduced primarily by Apple to interfacing with a computer through a mouse in the back in the 80s. We've got used to voice being part of the mix now with Amazon Alexa, and of course Google Assistant and Cortana and so on. But really, what you're working on is that next stage, and I don't know how you how far out you expect it to be till we sort of reach this world where we can chat with technology just as easily as how we're talking today. But what do you see that picture looking like, and what are the key steps along the way?
Yeah, well, really good question, really big question, and lots of different parts to that answer. So, I mean, look, obviously, we're, the AI era or the machine era, is really, even though, elements of, the what I call the bucket of technologies that make up artificial intelligence have been around for a very, very long time. The early machine learning algorithms date back to the 60s, and so we are really at the beginning of this era. What we do know is less people than we would think realize that they're interacting with artificial intelligence in some way on a daily basis already, whether it's buying something on Amazon or interacting over social media. I mean, AI is analyzing data and controlling a lot of the content and a lot of what's going on in the background. We're entering an era where we're going to spend more and more time talking to machines and interacting with machines. If this pandemic world we live in today becomes something that becomes a pandemic era, heaven forbid, where this, we're going to may see waves of coronaviruses or what, come through and repeat. Digital interaction is going to become, really, really important. So you get into questions. Well, how do brands create personal customer interactions when it's difficult to get them via a retail store, for example? So we recently a project we completed for the SK2 brand, the high-end skincare brand at Procter & Gamble, gives a peek into that future, in that SK2 asked us to work with them to build Yumi. But Yumi is an AI-based digital influencer who is designed to create these highly personal, brand interactions, conversations between 20-something-year-olds and Yumi about SK2 products. And what they are really looking at doing is targeting that brand at a completely different generation of users. And so that for us becomes, you start to think about it and say, well, right at the moment, there are lots of big brands that are struggling to create personal customer interactions at the moment, because shops, retail stores remain closed. So people are having to start to think about, how do we create that personal customer interaction. We've seen big companies, big organizations, government organizations, healthcare organizations, in times of crisis, help desks and customer service centers become very, very important, and they've become completely overwhelmed with the volumes of calls that they've taken. So you start to say, well, what role could a digital helper play in an environment like this? And one of the projects we launched ourselves recently was Bella Helps, a Kiwi digital companion who can answer questions about COVID-19, and is providing a whole lot of really interesting content provided by different people and from different industries and different parts of the New Zealand, just to provide a different way of showing what's a different way you can interact with people during a crisis. The cool thing about digital people is they don't get sick. They're infinitely scalable, which means you don't have long wait times. You can update content and everybody gets and knows exactly what to say when asked in exactly the same way. So it's not as if this technology is being designed to replace people. It's being designed to complement people. Let's use our help desks, and the amazingly skilled real people, that man them and staff them to focus on the 10% of the really, really difficult problems, and let's use, Bella and digital helpers like Bella to, handle, 80% of the queries, which are just the same questions being asked over and over again. So, there's some really, really different and interesting ways to think about where this technology goes, and the sorts of use cases. There are a number of really important enabling technologies, because AI is at a relative, in terms of that exponential curve and influence of that technology, it's still relatively early days. 5G networks will make a big impact to the provision of our technology and the sorts of experience. Having ubiquitous broadband, ubiquitous low latency, high availability networks everywhere is really going to help. That's going to be important. Advances in NLP engines and from the world of natural language processing to natural language generation is going to be important. We saw the guys at Google preview Duplex and some amazing voice synthesis technology. So all of these things become parts of the stack that we're part are parts of the way in which AI will become part of our lives. So and one of the core theses we have here is behind the artificial intelligence is going to create a lot of different machine type interactions, whether it's self-driving cars, for example, and we're going to have to learn how we're going to relate to those cars, those self-driving cars, if I use that as an example, how we're going to relate to them, how we're going to learn to trust them. And that's a really, really important part of the user experiences, because as human beings, we build relationships and we create trust through face-to-face interaction, through multimodal communication. You can ask, we're quite happy asking Siri a question and getting an answer, but are we really going to fall in love with Siri or build a relationship with Siri, or even a trusted relationship with Siri? So these are the parts of the future user experience that we're really exploring as a company, and there are lots of different parts of those components that come together. I mean, we imagine a world where in the future, augmented, if the headsets, the bulky headsets shrink down to a glasses size, they're comfortable to wear on an ongoing basis, it becomes a compelling part of the world. So maybe the future of tourism will be an AR experience, or part of the future of the tourism industry will be an AR experience. Do
we need to watch a few old movies like Total Recall to get a taste of the future, Greg?
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Look. Here's the thing. Science fiction and Hollywood, does a great job of helping us imagine what the future could be like. But let's also be really, really clear here. For some reason, us humans are entertained by very dystopian views of our future, whereas we actually have a very optimistic or a very utopian view of the world of the future, and the way in which we'll be able to collaborate and cooperate with machines, as opposed to be killed by them or be ruled over by them.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. We had a comment come through from Sean Dring and via Facebook, and he was asking, around ethical guidelines around using digital humans, and whether I guess this is probably some point in the future in terms of digital humans being able to potentially impersonate real people. But how much do you need to be thinking about those ethical challenges at the moment, or is that still some years off before you have to give it a huge amount of thought?
No, it's something we put a huge amount of thought into today. I mean, we have an ethics team, made up of IP lawyers, ethics specialists. We have Dr. Ali Knott, who's a professor at the University of Otago, who's a leading researcher in the world of AI and ethics, a leading researcher and commentator. We have an incredibly detailed policy that everybody in our company knows and understands, right through from research right through to customer success and implementation. So ethics is a very, very important part of it. When you think of governance, most companies have a audit and risk committee, and they have a remuneration committee. We also have an ethics subcommittee of our board. So we believe that ethics, privacy, data privacy in this world of AI and in this world of digital people that we're creating, we believe they're absolutely fundamental components of the future. I mean, first rule, the digital person that you're talking to should always tell you, "Hi, I'm a digital person. I'm not a real person." So how do you, because if you think about it, there's a fundamental problem there. If you're trying to create a relationship and trust, trying to trick people right from the outset, that's never going to work. There are industries, there are use cases, that we simply wouldn't allow. We would never, a simple example, we would never allow the creation of a digital politician. You know, we are already seeing the way in which social media is being used, you know, to influence, you know, the fundamental principles of our democracy. Having a digital president or a digital version of a prime minister of a country that can be used in run-ups to elections, you know, that's something we just said no. We will not allow those types of use cases, and that, you know, and so it hopefully gives you some ideas about, you know, where we see the boundaries, the parameters, and the guardrails. But, you know, you've got to start with from a fundamental position of you're using this technology to improve the lives of people. I mean you talked you touched on a little while ago, Paul, about whether New Zealand and New Zealanders can adapt. I mean, one of the things that absolutely blew me away was, you know, when we think of healthcare and we think of education, these are industries that in many respects have been quite slow to adopt new technologies, to become digital. Yet as they actually were forced to move to be digital, you know, at the beginning of April, it's been astonishing to see the speed at which GPs, specialists, schools have all found a way to go online and deliver, start delivering digital experiences to their, to their patients and to their students. So, once again, I've just been blown away at how quick people have been able to adapt and actually make it happen. So, I mean, for me, I just think it's a willingness, it's a willingness to do it. It's a need to do it. It's an acceptance that it's an imperative for the future.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Obviously there is some balance. I remember I was at in one of the TV newsrooms when it was announced. I think it must have been the national government we're going to transition the education system in New Zealand for there to be an element of online being available to people, online learning, and that being, you know, a component of our education system going forward. And there was some really hefty pushback from a couple of journalists that I spoke with, and I was actually sort of quite shocked how these things can sort of quickly move on to down a political track. And I just shared very quickly, my experience as a youngster, where my family travelled for a few months overseas, and we studied by what was then called the correspondence school. And look, the change in our circumstance, brought about the necessity for a different type of learning. And I remember that we were able to get through our schooling for the day, and maybe half the time than it would have taken in a traditional classroom. And certainly while we were still in New Zealand before we actually got on the road, we absolutely loved it. Now I think my memories of the rest of the travel were probably more on the travel than on the education side. But I remember looking back at scrapbooks and things and realizing actually that was something that worked very well. And I'm hopeful that from this time that we really will take away some of those learnings about the reality that sometimes being forced to do something different actually can bring about really good outcomes. And I guess that brings us to the as we sort of we don't have too much longer left, but keen to hear some of your thoughts on how for our businesses and organizations in New Zealand we should be maneuvering from this point so that we go forward strongly and don't allow our economy to collapse because we're stuck in this challenge of looking at the impact on tourism, and on other areas, and deciding to give up, as it were, but really how we can make some smart decisions and move forward. And often that's going to be quite small businesses needing to rethink how they operate, or look for some new strings to their bow, or in some cases we'll see businesses that have to shut down, but still you've got their people who need to find the next thing to do. So there is certainly room for completely new innovations and new businesses to spring up right now. What's on your mind in terms of how we should do that? I know it's obviously you've got to be thinking about your business, but I know your wealth of experience means you'll have some thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've touched on some of the themes that I think are important. The focus on moving digital. I mean, and this is something that doesn't exist just here in New Zealand. Every business in the world, has to look at a much faster and a much more dramatic move to a digital world. So, if you stop and think about it, as a simple example, online retail. I mean, Amazon is one of the biggest companies in the world. Yet online retail worldwide sits around about 10% of all retail sales. So you can imagine, in the world that we're in now, I don't think anybody can give an accurate estimate, but let's say we move from the beginning of March, when global average was around 10%, some higher, some lower. Let's imagine a world by the end of 2020 where it's maybe 50% of all retail spend is done online via e-commerce. You stop and think about that, and that's a huge shift. But with that huge shift is this massive opportunity. To be part of an emerging industry, a new industry, and it won't be one that's completely dominated by big companies. It'll be dominated by innovative companies that define their products, their service, their niche, their unique value proposition, and deliver it digitally in a way that amazes their customers. So you're not going to see, if that indeed is, one of the outcomes of this. It's a massive opportunity for, massive opportunity for new businesses. It's a massive opportunity for existing businesses to pivot and change direction. You think about it. You could also think about the efficiencies that digitization can deliver in the health industry, or in the health sector, or in the education sector, through online, through the use of digital technologies and online. So what are the ways that our governments can become more efficient users of taxpayer dollars? Because I mean, the restructuring, I suspect, I don't have a huge amount of time to spend studying it, but I suspect, this is going to be looking at both sides of, from an economic recovery point of view, both sides of it. How do we drive, new industry, new business, new growth opportunities on one hand, and how do we create, we use, taxpayer money, any debt funding we create, how do we use it to drive more efficiency, in the way in which we deliver those fundamental products and services. So, that in itself is a huge opportunity. The New Zealand technology industry is a major contributor, to the New Zealand economy, and one that's growing dramatically. With tourism being so challenged by the current environment for the, for at least the immediate future, there's obviously huge opportunities, for the New Zealand technology industry to step up and grow as well. So that's some of the ways that I think about it, and some of the challenges that are there. I mean, remain optimistic. New Zealand small businesses, New Zealand's entrepreneurs, our innovation ecosystem is extremely robust, is extremely, strong. We have, the platform that has been built since the beginning of the century, I think will be a strong part of our recovery going forward.
Great. Oh, well, thank you very much for your insights there, Greg. I'm very upbeat and positive about New Zealand's potential and the potential around the world. But I think we have some some really unique ways of doing business here in New Zealand. And I hope that rather than giving up, we'll certainly see people looking to maybe collaborate as well. I think that's going to be really really important part is drawing on the expertise and input of others. So we'll certainly keep talking about that across our podcasts on the Podcast New Zealand network, including the New Zealand Tech podcast and the New Zealand Business podcast. But we've got a few other shows there, like This Climate Business from Vincent Heringer, which is delving into some of these challenges and opportunities. So well, thank you very much, Greg, for your time, and I hope we'll be able to have you back on another podcast in the not too distant future to hear some more.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me, and look forward to coming back again, Paul.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Greg. You have a great day.
Bye-bye.